Hello, 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 and welcome back to Tea, Coffee, Water. I am your host, Natalie Poindexter, and we're back with Kendrick. I am so excited on this coffee edition. Thank you for coming. Yes. Um, and we are talking strategy and sustainability in the nonprofit world. Um, and some of you might be thinking, like, Natalie, you have a consulting business that's not a nonprofit. Why are you talking about it? Great question. Great question. It's because it's happening everywhere I go. Everywhere I go, people are saying, oh, nonprofit, nonprofit, nonprofit. And a lot of it is in starting nonprofits. It is in accessing funding because they think that's the only way to get it through is being a nonprofit. But I had this experience, and Michelle and I talked about it previously, of going to the One Star Foundation Texas Nonprofit Summit earlier this year. And there was this fantastic session on strategy and strategic planning. And there were other consultants there that were strategic planners. And one of the things that I have started to introduce into a conversation with my consulting work, because yes, I do work with nonprofits, is sustainability mapping, which is a term I've kind of curated with a variety of different words. But it truly means, what is it that you are taking? What is your idea that you have for this nonprofit? And what does that look like month by month, year by year? And how are you actually, like, what are the steps that you're actually going to take to get there? Because it's wonderful to have this idea, but if you don't have a process in place to get there, then you're stuck. And I mentioned this to Greg before we got started. I was like, yeah, we're going to talk strategic plans. And he was like, what? People still do that? For real? And so I was like, what are you saying to me? What do you mean? And so please, like, I know that, again, we talked about a little bit, it's just language, right? Like,
yeah.
Being mindful. And I think this is just one more reminder that, like, you have to know your audience.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to know your audience. And so saying words like strategic plan, which is exactly what you said, you like this 3 to 5 year plan. But if you could, like, recapture what you broke down, which was, it was more about like the vision versus like this 3 to 5 year idea. Tell me, yeah, can you fill that in? I might have done that poor justice of replication.
Yeah. And it's just one of those things that, like, it's part of me. Like, so number one, I think strategic plans, like, are good. They're great. They make sense. I will also say it does remind me of, like, kind of the old strategic plans from when I first was getting started, and somebody was like, well, here's our strategic plan. And they would have this whole document that they've spent all these years doing. And I'm like, so where are we in this? Well, we're right here. Have you accomplished anything that you said you was going to do? Well, no. So what are we doing? Right. And we're just gonna keep doing this because this is going good. And I was like, well, no, it's apparently, like, the things have shifted, right? And so I think because I have that thought in my head, is like, it's like blah, but it's good. It's good. I think it's important. I think for me, I think part of this is perspective, right? That part of what we have to look at doing our strategic plan is important, but we have to see it as a living document, right? Right. And I think as long as we see it as a living document and not like this closed canon, right, that you can't add to it or take away from it, right? Yeah. I think that's what's important. So I think is it critically important, right, for us as any organization, as any business, right, to be able to have a living strategic plan that is able to ebb and flow with kind of what's going on in the world, what's going on in your particular niche of industry, what's going on the ground, right, where things are going on with, and so I think it's important. The way in which I look at this work, and I'll be honest, like, I probably am not the most organized person, right, and so but the way in which I talk about, but I do find myself to be strategic. Like, I think many people would say that I've been really strategic in the way in which we do this work. And it's weird because I'm weird in the process of this work, but, like, the way in which we talk about this, right, is it's all about vision, right, for us, like being particularly, again, being in a faith inspired organization, leading the charge as both a pastor of a church and also helping to lead some other nonprofit work. We talk about this work in terms of, like, what's the ultimate vision, right? And for us, in particular at Corey, we talk about the sense of like we are use the words of Martin Luther King and others. We're creating this beloved community, right? That we have this vision of what can be, right? That's part of that prophetic work that we have, that we can be able to say, hey, no, actually, we can create neighborhoods that are hopeful. We can create neighborhoods where people aren't being killed by the environmental degradation that their communities are continuing to face. That we can create communities that are full of joy and that are just as well, and that's possible. And so then the question is, in the interim, is right, how do we make the move from where we are to where we're going? And so strategic plan, often I use the phrase strategic initiatives, which is these elements that go on that take us on, having a sense of core values, right? So we always talk about like everything we're doing is values based, and so being able to identify like what are your values, and so even if you don't have a plan that lays out everything else, every decision that you make is going to be come back to the sense of like, does this align with our values? Right? Does this align with what we know that who we are, right? Would us making this decision mean that we are behaving, we are responding in a way that is actually connected with how we believe we are called to act, to behave, to be, right? And so I think those are the ways in which I often use the language in a lot of this work that I'm doing, that I'm leading.
Okay, thank you, one, for that. Two, I called it in our little I won't say little, in our notes, right, of that it's a functional strategic plan. And I think, right, like you said, it's a living document. And of course, right, relating this back to funding, where people will see funding that comes out and they're like, oh, it's in my area. It's for faith-inspired, organizations. It's, it hits all of these numbers, all of these tick marks for us, but we don't actually have any idea how to put it in place. But you know what? To hell with it. We're just going to go do it, right? And you end up going and spending time writing a grant that doesn't match your vision, your core values, your mission, or, and we talked about this before, what your community actually needs.
Right.
And I think that is just so massive in how we address things, looking at, nonprofits are community-based organizations, right? Whether you are faith-based or not, you are a community-based organization. And I think I'm just like, this is something that I've been curious about, of like, when a strategic plan is created or a sustainability map is created, because that sustainability map is not just your organization, it is like holistic in all of the spaces that are surrounding, right? Like you said, these environmental injustices that are happening within communities, right? Like food access, transportation, right? Like jobs that are actually paying well enough that someone can live off of them. Those types of things are all within your community's ecosystem. And nerd out real quick for all of my public health friends. There's a wheel, right? And within that cyclical wheel, at the center of it is the individual, right? And then you go one level out, and that's like their household. And then you go one level out, and that's their community. And then you go another level out, and that's their like environment and ecosystem within that community. And then you go another level out, right? And it goes all the way, of course, to the federal space, but at the very core of it is that individual. And when we are doing things in public health, we always have to talk about that individual. And I'm just like, how do you broach that conversation, right? We talked previously about you ending a program because it wasn't a solution. It was a Band-Aid, right? It was some duct tape. It was some 50-year-old duct tape. Like, how can we inspire, move the needle, change the conversation, build the tables, right? Like, these are all terms that I've been using throughout this year. How do we create that space where someone can say, and this can be ideal, like this can be like your ideal scenario, right? We've got Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and they're like, you know what? Empty check, blank check, do what you need. We believe in your mission value, this whole idea, right? Or is it truly like creating more cohorts and having these conversations around how do you create a community strategic plan that is going to be flexible enough to shift just like your community does?
Yeah. So this is in some ways, right? I feel like there's a quick answer and then always a longer answer, right? And I think the quicker answer is like you just have to continually be connected to your community, right? Like you have to be on the ground and you have to be listening, right? Like I think like really listening, right? Like and not the way in which we listen sometimes, which will we just try to listen enough so that we can have a response to say it back, right? But like where we're listening and it's deep listening and we don't even talk for a while, right? Because we're just taking it all in. I was trained in some of the community development work as a model called asset-based community development. And a key part of asset-based community development is doing asset mapping, right? And where you sit with people and have some intentional course and literally the person who's facilitating this work, all they do is ask the question. It says, what you start off very broad, like, what are your community's assets, but then you go very specific. And what are the personal assets that are here, right? What are the business assets? What are the more kind of community-based assets, right? So that could be, there's a garden here and there's this here, and so people be able to kind of name that. So you kind of break those levels down, right? Being able to offer space for people to be able to name and to name what are assets, and then moving that question on to another place and saying like, so what do you desire, right? What are the things you dream about, right? For your and again, sometimes this is hard, difficult work because we also for a lot of work that we're doing, a lot of people in the communities we're in, we also realize that we're in communities that in many regards are also dream deficit, right? So people don't know how to dream, right? They quit dreaming about what's possible because of what they face every single day. And so that's a whole nother thing that we can that we can have a conversation back. But like I think it's about being very intentional, right? And even even if you're a large organization, right, you should have folks that all they do is just spend time on the ground and listen, right? And then you kind of have these convenient members where they just come back and say, hey, this is what we're hearing. This is what we're hearing. And I think unless you make space to hear from the real live experience of people, you won't be able to do this work well. And because we got to name some realities, right? A lot of people who are doing this work, they don't live in the neighborhoods in which they are helping to lead this change. They may socialize in those neighborhoods sometimes, perhaps if there's a new thing that's been kind of started there that they want to be a part of, but they aren't connected. And what we're finding, right? Again, this is research. Gosh, I wish I can remember the article that just came out recently in which they were kind of talking about how folks in different parts of economic and geographic stratus are disengaging with each other more and more, right? So they're not connecting with each other. And so I think any great nonprofit that's trying to build a strategic and sustainable plan for the future has to do that work of saying, no, we're going to cross these, we're going to kind of make sure that these bridges remain, that we can kind of continue to make sure that there's conversation and intersection across communities. We're going to continue to doing the work of ensuring that there aren't going to be these walls erected that kind of relegate people to particular spaces, but instead we're going to do this work of saying, no, let's come together. And so those are just some of my thoughts.
No, I mean, it's so interesting you say this because the connectivity between our conversations. So like Michelle and I were talking about, how with fundraising, right? Like how do you build relationships? And she said, I worked at a place where we could actually code our time to go and meet with people, to go and have lunch with people, to go and have coffee with them, whatever it was, to go to their event. We got paid and our organization paid us to go and do that. And that is just like what you're saying, right? Is like you have in your whatever hour day, part of that or work week needs to be going across the other side of the railroad tracks and having the conversation.
Yeah.
And
I think for me, some of that comes from I remember I had a actually I was working on the pastor, associate pastor this place. This person, Pastor Lou, was leading, and she would always give me these gems, but she would always say to me, and again, this could be it's very connected to ministry, but I just name this, right? That, like she said, ministry happens in the interruptions. Right. And so because I think I came complaining. I was like, I can't get anything done. This keeps happening. She was like, said, no. Ministry happens in the interruption. That's where actually it happens. Right. And so she didn't have to teach me. So what you actually are planning to do, what you're trying to do, is to work yourself in a place so that when an interruption happens, you can be able to lean into that place and to be available to that. And I think right now for a lot of places that are kind of nonprofit based, a lot of small ones, we know that. We see that happens, right?
Yeah.
Where if you run in a food pantry, if you're running something like that, you realize that you have this plan for the day, and all of a sudden that gets disrupted, right? Because some volunteer didn't show up or something else didn't happen, right? And so all of a sudden you gotta do that. But for places where they have a little bit more structure and there's a little bit more of a space between folks who are leading these organizations and people who are on the ground, maybe benefiting from the services of organization, the further that gap is, the less likely they're able to see that in the interruptions, right? The interruption of the day is totally different from what people who are on the ground experience. So I think you have to build those places where you kind of connect. So
I think I feel like the other part that you mentioned with that asset management, right? I mentioned this to this nonprofit that I'm gonna do some work with in Houston. And it was so interesting. She's been in it for a while now. She's got multiple arms from this nonprofit. And she was talking about doing a conference. And I said, and it was a youth-focused event. And there was all of these different aspects of it. And of course, as soon as she started talking, I was like, oh, have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? Have you thought of this? And she mentioned, oh man, you're reminding me about when I first started, where I was like truly thinking about who did I know in the community? Who did I have relationships with? Who was a connection that I had, right? Like I was just making general phone calls like, yo, I need some things from you. And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever, right? And so that was so part of it was like sneakers. They wanted to do some work around zero waste and like giving back, right, with sneakers. And I was like, oh, well, I know some people, right? And I'm like, I said this earlier this year, like I know a guy, right? And I was like, I know some people. And she was like, oh yeah, well, I know these people too. And I was like, oh no, let me just say this. I'm not saying I know more people than you, right? What I am saying is I have extra people. And that is a thing I think too, of just like reminding in that asset management side, you might have relationships with the grocery stores here that are massive, but their focus may be very specific. But do you have access to the farmers? Because I might have access to the farmers, right? And so like that, right? So it's just reminding. I loved what you said about listening, because it's a lot of like, I am listening to your needs, your problems, and I am then curating this solution, right? And you can keep dropping these nuggets of goodness, right? But at the end of the day, if you, relating this back, don't go on the other side of the railroad tracks and have that conversation, then how do you build? How do you create? How do you have that connectivity?
So I want to turn the tables for a minute and ask you a question, Natalie. So if you do you believe there's a certain level to which an organization has to be at before they can start doing a sustainability map? Is there a particular level? Is there like what's needed? What's the precursor, right, to sustainability mapping for organization?
I think I don't think that there's a certain level of experience that they have to have, but there is a certain level of vision.
Ooh, come on.
Hey, listen.
Yes.
So what I mean by that is if you come to me and you're like, I need this support. And I'm like, okay, what's the support you need? And they're like, oh, we need professional development training. Okay, why do you need professional development training? Well, we need professional development training, and just go with me on this journey real quick.
Mm-hmm.
We need professional development training because we just hired 5 new people and we're going to promote the other 3 that were here.
Right.
Okay, well, what's your onboarding process? Well, they just start. Okay. What is your management development process? How do you know that those 3 people, just because they worked there, are now capable of being managers? And they're like, well, they've been here. Okay. So what is your leadership development process? Because then now we're getting to the root of it. How did you bring all of these folks in, your directors, whomever they might be, or maybe it's just you? What is the structure that you've gone through? Because we know people are leaving organizations because of poor management. They never leave because of good leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the piece, that's the vision that I want to hear from this person who's saying to me, well, this is what we need.
Yeah.
And I want to know, but why, right? It's like, well, I need this thing. Okay, but why do you need that thing? Well, I need it because, right? And if that because is like this ellipses of not a fully developed idea, then what is your vision?
Yeah.
Right. I've used this metaphor before of how do you eat an elephant, of like, I teach people how to eat an elephant.
Yeah.
And everybody always says, oh, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Sure. That might take you forever. I know it's very barbaric, but like, that's going to take you forever. Right. And so you're going to get drained along the way. You're probably going to lose your passion along the way. You're probably going to question why you're doing what you're doing along the way. You might even close up shop. Because getting to that last bite was so hard. It was draining. It was, we talked about burnout before. And so I don't think that it has to be a level of experience or longevity, right? Whether you are 6 months old or 6 years old or 16 years old. If you don't have a vision, and I'm not talking about a vision statement, right? Like you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you have a sustainable process beyond that 12-month calendar year?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so good. I mean, I'm reminded in some ways, when you were talking about that, it reminded me of a mentor who always said, provision always follows vision, right? That you can, you know what I mean? That the way in which a good vision, right? Again, it's not about having a vision statement that's super compelling, but it is about are you able to kind of name the narrative, name the story, name the why, right, that you're doing this work to, and is that right? Is that based in the sense of like who you know yourself to be in reality, what you hold true, what are your values, right? Like that then the provision is able to come, right? The things that you need, the assets, the gifts, the abundance, right, is able to come because you've done the work, right, of creating a space even, right? All that to be able to kind of happen and come through. So that's so good. That's so good. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. I think it's a lot of fun to talk about because when I started off in this world, I was making evaluation plans for grants. And the Department of Labor, we had this grant, and they said, well, we need a program evaluation and we need a participant evaluation. We basically want to know, what are you doing with our money, and is it making an impact? And I think with that sustainability map or strategic plan or long-term vision, the question is like, what is the impact that you're trying to make? Because like you said, right? And I think that, man, like, I feel like that is so powerful that you were like, we have duct tape. We've got glue. We've got some stitching that is coming undone, and we're just gonna keep on stitching it back together. We're just gonna keep on stitching. And like, to make that decision to then say, how do we make it so that we don't have to keep stitching, we don't have to keep duct taping, we don't have to keep gluing, right? Yeah. And then driving that is such a powerful move to, and commitment. And so I think, just to be able to go back and say, we have to be comfortable shifting, even when it's uncomfortable. We have to be okay when someone says, like, this is not what we need, right? And understanding too, like, I guess the other part of, like, is do your research, right? Because if you're going to make this impact, and this is like, it just took me there for a moment. South by Southwest this year, Mark Cuban made this fantastic statement about entrepreneurship. And I feel like it is spot on to what I was going to say about making an impact. And he said, you might have this brilliant idea and you do your research and you see nobody's doing it. Nobody's doing it. And so you go and you make your business plan and you go through all of these processes and you're like, yep, I'm going to be the one. But what you didn't do was pull back the coverage a little bit further and realize that 10 other people had done the same exact thing that you were trying to do and failed every single time. And so, yeah, it's a great idea that you're the only one doing it, but it's not going to be a successful idea because it's not going to work. And you're doing the same exact thing, right, that somebody else is doing. And so I just think about that from that impact piece, right? Like, it is beyond the, making that vision. It's beyond like your living document, right? It's truly, what is that thing? What is that solution that you're going to keep honing in on? And you're going to keep adapting and adapting and adapting to actually make that impact. And so, yeah, I think just like the pieces, like everything that we've talked about thus far is just really around being flexible.
Yeah.
And that, I don't think that means changing your mission. It doesn't mean changing who you are as an organization, but it does mean that, relating it back to a very simplistic idea. If the road is closed and that's your way to get home, you got to find another way to get home.
Right.
And you're not going to be like, well, guess I'm never going home again. I'm just going to sit here, right? You have this moment to navigate.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. I think it's so often organizations, right? We allow the methods to kind of preclude the mission, right? That we've become so glued to the method, the way in which we were trying to live out the mission, that we forget that it was the mission that was the driving force in the beginning. Right. And I think if you look at organizations that get stuck, and I know these organizations, right? Because I've been a part of them, I've led them, is that they've gotten so caught up in this is the way it's done, and this is the way we've done it. And they've gotten so caught up in those methods that they've missed the point of the mission, right? And that goes back to this saying, like, that's why you have to have this living strategic plan. Right, one that you're able to kind of have and implement and make sure that it aligns with the mission. One that's able to state clearly, like, what you value and what you hope for, where you're moving towards. That's able to name, right, these benchmarks and these hopes, these outcomes that you have, right, over the course of a quarter, over the course of a year, over the course of what 3 years looks like. I think all that's great, but you also have to have that ability to kind of then come back to it. And say, all right, is this still serving us? Or is there a way where we have seen that leaning into what this area makes more sense than necessarily doing here? And maybe we change some timelines, maybe we shift and we adapt based on that. And then how do we then articulate that out to everyone else? I think that's always a thing. It's like, if we're going to make these changes, we want to be kind of flexible and nimble like that. We then have to have a communication plan that is also nimble, and that kind of has to be a part of things from the beginning, right? It's building those two systems kind of to kind of coexist, right? A nimble communication plan that is always about kind of creating clarity, and a nimble process for evaluating and moving the needle on our strategic plan.
Oh, so this just like, I'm just curious, and I don't know if this is a thing in nonprofits yet or not. What's the conversation around project management professionals, right? PMPs, like in the tech world, PMPs are like needed everywhere,
Right.
everywhere. But I'm just curious, because you're saying, right, like strategic plan, communications plan, evaluation plan, right, your transition plan. And as someone who works with the PMP very closely, that's her world, that is her language. Like, it's monstrous to even pretend to understand. Um, have PMPs rolled into the nonprofit world yet?
Oh, absolutely. And I think I mean, it's always about like what levels, right? So, I have not worked at nonprofit organizations that, have multi-million dollar budgets, right? That's not the area in which I worked at. I worked in mainly smaller organizations. And these small organizations to mid-size, it's not a thing where people are necessarily trying to, right? I think because they're still doing it. I think in some of these larger ones, I think you are seeing a little bit of that integration in some large philanthropies, philanthropic organizations as well. So those who are, the foundations or the arms of these family foundations that are kind of doing this work, you're seeing that. And in some of these very large nonprofits that have, 100 folks on staff, right? Like I think you see that. Yeah.
I feel like so like just again relating back to like getting started with these evaluation plans, it was interesting because no one in my department knew what that was. Now, granted, this was some years ago, but being in public health, you have to learn a variety of different strategies to implement, right? Like you have your Gantt charts, you have your logic models, you have your assessments, right? You have all of these different things that your surveys, your qual methods, right? Like you have all of these different methodologies that you can implement to ensure that you're making the impact that you think you are. And I think, we've talked about communication from an organizational level, like an internal, right? Like how is one organization talking to another organization? But then I think when I hear communications plan, right, it's that same thing. Like I did this during my internship with different departments within the city. And I set up a communications plan with them. And it was something like a timeline, right? Like you guys are going to talk these times, this for, X amount of reasons. And then you're going to circle back with each other. And then you're going to do this. And then you're going to circle back like every, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks, they were having some sort of form of communication. And so, yeah, I was just curious, right? Of like, have those techniques been introduced to smaller nonprofits? And then I'm wondering also, like, because they're smaller, when is it the right time to introduce, let's just say, for instance, right, PMP consultant says, Greg, yeah, let me come work with you. Let me come do some work with you. How do you integrate that conversation into a small nonprofit? Because I feel like it's not the norm, right? You mentioned like these are big nonprofits that are being able to do these things, but how do you do it with those like grassroots organizations? How do we still support, develop, improve what is happening in smaller spaces in that structural format, right? Like, is it just like a lunch and learn? Is it a webinar? Is it some professional development funding where you can say like, I've got a person who's really good at Excel, so I'm going to send them to get a certification? Like, or is it not even like a need per se, because you could just have somebody come and develop a strategic plan for you? I have an underlying question of why I said it like that. Let me just say that.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where I think in various circumstances, the answer to that question is going to be different, right? Because we know not every nonprofit is the same. Like, even every small nonprofit, right? One that may be totally focused on kind of on the ground work, they
Mhm.
may not see that as an important thing, right? Like I know some places they're like, we ain't got time for that, right? Like we got to get this food out the door. Maybe if you want to tell me some of this work while you help me stock shelves, then perhaps we can make time for that, right? You're going to have some smaller ones that are more focused, that are moving more on like how do you solve things on the ground. I think they may be more apt to that. You may be some that nonprofits that are kind of tech based, right? In the ways and the application and the services they're offering, so they may be more apt to that. So I think I think part of it is that is how do you build the capacity, I think, for these multiple even layers within even the small nonprofit space. I think there could be there's some low entry type things where, hey, inviting somebody to some lunch and learns, offering that's gonna be somebody's. There's going to be others for whom they have a larger capacity for that, and they'd be ready to take on a consultant and say, "Hey, let's walk through this
Mhm.
and do this work," because they may realize that for them, as they are either trying to scale up the capacity of the organization to either take on more programs or projects, or to at least have great impact in some other way, they know that in order to do that, they have to have an apparatus that can support. Right, you have to have an organizational apparatus that can support the growth and that you're anticipating.
So one of the things that I mentioned at the summit and regularly now is interns.
Mm,
Um, there was a person, obviously, I kind of probably threw off their whole pitch, but they were like, "Yes, bring our company in, and we're consultants, and we'll do strategic plans for nonprofits." And I was like, or you could go to any university that has a public health program and find you an intern. Because most public health programs, you have to do an internship in order to
mm,
graduate. And funny thing, we don't always have enough places and organizations to do work with.
yeah,
So we have to go hunt and find them, right? And so I'm just like thinking, obviously, right? Like I've been a part of these organizations that are a little bit bigger, and I've been a part of the ones where it's like 8 people,
right.
right? And they're like, I don't care. The intern we need to stock shelves, right? The intern we need to deliver certainly, deliver, products to residents or participants. But I'm just curious, right? Like introducing interns to do that exact thing, right? Like it's free. It is someone who you can just be like, figure this out. But it's also someone which is part of like what I've struggled with, is they aren't coming to you as subject matter experts per se. And I feel like you're a little bit more willing to be vulnerable with them.
Mm,
There's a little bit more humility that is uh in the conversation of like, yeah, we really don't know what we're doing, just so you know, right? But you
yeah,
have this
yeah.
consultant that comes in and you're like, nope, together, we know exactly what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this, right? You're just here to help us, right? And so I'm
Yeah.
just wondering, like, again, thinking about opening your doors to a person, whether it's a consultant, an intern, whomever it might be, to support, is that a worthwhile conversation?
Oh, I think so. I mean, and this, I've built kind of internship programs at two of the places I've been at in the past, and I think the value in having an intern is could be so great, right? It depends on how it does. And again, I've done it in one way where it wasn't well because, right, 'cause again, they just with a person who's stocking shelves, and I realized, like, well, these folks offer some different values. When I ran Freedom Schools, one of the things I did early in my in my vocational work is I ran Freedom Schools, And in freedom schools, you kind of have, part of this work, you have certain, CDF, Children's Defense Fund freedom schools, these different sites around the country. Just kind of give a quick overview, focus on literacy.
Yep.
So literacy-based things in the summer. It's a 6 to 8 week program, depending on the sites you're at. And as part of this work, you have servant leader interns. And you have these, you have folks who, many of them are college students. They have to be, over 19, typically in college, and you bring them in. And then this one summer, was this person who applied. I only needed 5 people, needed to be kind of classroom teachers. And I saw this other person, and I was like, oh, you have a background in chemistry. Oh, you do this. And so we actually hired him on again as another intern. And instead of him being dedicated to being in the classroom, he kind of started running STEM labs, right? And again, that's an off just example, but like I think about that in the ways in which that like I saw the gifts that this person potentially could bring, right? Because I think interns bring gifts. They do bring a certain set of knowledge, or at least something that they're working through, right? It offers an opportunity to potentially take this person and say, hey, we've been thinking about this, right? What do you see? Or to bring them in and say, your job is to be the external eyes. Like we need fresh eyes to look at this, because somebody who can then come and ask the question, well, why do you do this? Why do you do that? Right. Yeah. I think even just having an intern just to do that. Right. And so, yeah, you're teaching them and you're showing them your way, but then their job is to ask why. How do you hope to, you say this is your vision. Okay. So how do you hope to do this? Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, how does this work for you? And I think offering this generative space, right, to have a person who's worked in the team do that is just could be amazing for an organization, right? That 50 to 75% of their job is just that. Right.
Okay, so I know this is not the conversation that we were planning to have, but I think I think you mentioned something, and you didn't even mention it, but what you explained was a leader with a high emotional intelligence.
Well, absolutely.
Right? Like that is exactly what you just and now there is this bigger conversation around like people are looking for leaders with a high EQ versus a high IQ, because you just explained like you were able to identify strengths that are within this person who is going to be doing things potentially with your organization, potentially doing things. And we're like, I think you'd be way better at this. I think there's this space in place that we actually need you in more. And I want to pull that out of you. I am giving you the space to be your authentic self and to fulfill this role. We weren't thinking we actually needed, but it was in that vision.
Yeah.
Like that, I think, I mean, like, I feel like that just circled all the way back to like, but I need you for this thing.
Yeah.
Because you had that vision versus, well, you don't really fit the role that we need. So peace out, homie.
Yeah. Yeah. It always, so for me, like it's always going to come back to vision. It's always going to come back to values, right? Do you have a vision that is honestly expansive enough, right? to be able to think, not just, moving your organization from here from where it is now to where it can still be the same organization in 3 years, right? It has to be more than that. You have to be able to say, who will we become? Right. And again, this always relates back to my own sense of being faith inspired, right? We're folks who always say that we are and we are becoming, right? Like we are who we are right now, and we also are becoming, and right, we're being made new each and every day. And so because of that, I think that's the way in which I look at the work that we're called to do, right? That we are who we are right now, but we also are becoming. And so in everything we're doing, we're always being able to ask this place, like who are we needing to be, right, to be able to ensure that we're meeting the desires and even just meeting the people, right, who what folks are looking for even right now. So man, that was something I was getting ready to say, and I just lost it. It'll come back. Listen,
we have this is the Natalie show, aka Tea Coffee Water.
Right. Yeah. No, oh, I know it was, vision and
Yeah.
values. Vision and values. Always come back to that, right? So being able to understand. So because of us, again, just going back to that freedom school, right? Because we have this value and in providing for our students fun and safe and just environment that was able to just be exploring, right? Like we were able to be able to say, hey, how can we kind of step up this experience, right? And that because we knew what our values were, we knew what our visions were. So yeah.
No, I feel like, I know, again, you talked about being organized previously and pretty to put together, and like I'm the one.
No, I talked about my lack of organization. But I'm getting better. I'm getting better.
It's a joint effort in this system called the world, right? Like we gotta help each other out in these spaces and places. And I thought of this. I met this lovely woman, Melina, and she has a podcast called oh my goodness, Natalie. It's the brainy something or other. I'm shameful. It's shameful. I shouldn't have even used this example. But she's been doing a podcast on behavioral economics for years, right? She's a professor in it. And she's got like 200 some odd episodes of this podcast. And she started a certification program and all of these things, right, behind her studies. And I was telling her, I'm launching this podcast. And I promise I'm getting to a point. And she said, oh, well, don't get into the podcast fad, which is you do about 7 episodes and then you can't keep going because you don't have enough content. And I said, oh, funny thing. So I have like 45 episodes planned right now, currently mapped out and agreed upon. I say all that to say, I would love to come back and have another conversation with you around emotional intelligence as a leader. Because that is not something I haven't even thought of talking about, but I think it is something that a lot of leadership development classes are talking about. A lot of, the general conversation in the business world and community is like, we want good leaders. We don't want managers anymore, right? We want strong leaders, and a part of that leadership is exactly what you mentioned with that young person and their chemistry background, right? Like, and again, relating it back to the vision and the values. And I think like that within itself, if you have the time for us, I would love to come back and have that conversation.
Love to do that. Love to do
that.
Yeah.
Man. Okay. Yeah. So again, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
So that just lets everybody know, stay tuned, keep your ears and your eyes open for another episode for Coffee about emotional intelligent leaders. In ways that, I don't know, I want to deep dive into that. I want to do some research into what's available and accessible, but I would love to be able to hear from a leader, right, who is like, yep, been there, done that, get it, know how to do it, right, still working, right, on being better at it, but giving those tips and insights to all of these folks who are saying, I want to start a nonprofit, or I want to start a for-profit. It doesn't even matter at this point.
Yeah.
And building that out. Yeah. So, so excited to have you yet again.
This was amazing. I'm so glad.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And we will find some time to circle back with you and Michelle, which I can't even imagine. It's going to, hopefully we will stay on time.
Hopefully.
But if not, oh well, just extra time for fun, excitement, education, and a little sass. Who knows what'll happen. But thank you so much for being here, and look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.